What if the act of creating life was not a blessing, but an irreversible decision carried out in silence? What if bringing a child into the world was not an act of love, but a reflection of personal desire? This is the foundation of a quiet, unsettling idea known as antinatalism, a philosophy rarely spoken aloud, yet deeply provocative. To begin understanding it, let's imagine something together. You're holding a key not made of metal, but something invisible and sacred. This key holds a quiet power. With a single turn, it brings forth a person, someone who didn't exist before, but who now will feel, suffer, age, and day. They'll walk through joy and pain, grace and despair, sunlight and shadow. But here's what matters most. They never asked for it. They didn't request to be. They didn't choose to exist. And yet, you decided for them. Would you turn the key? This thought sits at the center of antinatalism. Philosopher David Benatar offered one of its clearest arguments in his haunting book, Better Never to Have Been. He introduces something called asymmetry. If someone is never born, they do not experience pain, and that's good. They also don't feel pleasure, but since they never existed, they don't miss it. However, if someone is born, they're guaranteed to feel pain, and whatever pleasure comes never fully cancels out the harm. In this way, Benatar suggests, the creation of life is inherently unjust. A gamble played on behalf of another, without their permission. This isn't just abstract theory. Look at the world around us. War, poverty, disease, climate breakdown, anxiety, loneliness, and the inescapable truth of death. Even in the lives filled with beauty, these shadows remain. Antinatalists argue that to create new life in such a world is not a hopeful act, but a reckless one. Some go even further. Philosopher Julio Cabrera believes procreation violates basic moral responsibility. To bring a life into being is to impose risks, pain, and struggle on someone who had no choice. He calls it an act not of kindness but of power, a unilateral decision masked as care. And then there's Les Knight, an environmental thinker whose views stretch the idea outward. He founded the voluntary human extinction movement, not out of hatred for people, but from a deep concern for the planet. Knight believes that human beings have inflicted irreversible damage on the Earth. Our growth has meant deforestation, polluted oceans, rising heat, vanishing species. In his view, choosing not to reproduce is a final gift, not only to others, but to the world itself. No more footprints, no more fire, only quiet and balance restored. But of course, there's the other side. What about the joy of existence? The first laugh of a baby, the embrace of love, the thrill of music, the spark of discovery. Don't these moments make the struggle worthwhile? To the antinatalist, even these joys are fragile and fleeting. For every moment of light, there is one of darkness. For every connection, a loss. For every beginning, an end. And even the happiest life must eventually face the truth of death. Often painful, often feared. The beauty of life, they say, does not erase its cruelty. It only masks it for a while. Still, many critics find this view too bleak, too heavy, even nihilistic. But antinatalists don't claim to hate life. They argue from compassion. They suggest that true empathy means not forcing others to bear a burden they never chose. In this way, antinatalism isn't about despair, but about release, a quiet decision to hold the key, but never turn it. And so we return to the question, if you held that key and knew the risks, would you use it? Would you invite someone into a world of uncertain joy and certain suffering? Or would you leave the key untouched, a silent mercy, never spoken, never remembered, but deeply felt? Antinatalism does not demand, only asks. And in asking, it gently unsettles one of our deepest beliefs, that to create life is always a good thing. A predator stalks the forest, its prey unaware. An insect is swallowed whole. A bird is torn from the sky. This isn't cruelty or malice. It's the natural order, a system we've come to call life. But what if that system was the problem? Efilism is a rare and radical philosophy that doesn't just question human life. It questions all life. It asks, what if the most compassionate act is not to sustain life, but to bring it to an end? Imagine a vast machine, a factory that's been operating for billions of years. It creates creatures non-stop, each born into struggle, each programmed to crave survival, to feel pain, to die. This machine has no plan, no kindness, no mercy. Its only directive is to copy genes, to replicate DNA endlessly. This is evolution. To Efilists, this machine is not only broken, but monstrous. Life, they say, is not sacred. It is a blind loop of need, fear, and loss. To see it clearly, look at nature. A lion must kill to eat. A zebra must run to live. Neither chose this dance, neither escapes the fear. One must suffer for the other to survive. We call this balance, but Efilists call it a blood ritual, repeating endlessly without purpose. But nature is only part of the picture. Look closer at human life. Even in comfort, we are aging, decaying, grasping at fleeting happiness, while always heading toward death. There is joy, yes, but also pain, regret, grief, and the quiet terror of knowing it all ends. And this isn't just our fate. It belongs to every conscious being, from the smallest worm to the largest whale, all of them trapped in a game they never agreed to play. Efilism says that this isn't just unfortunate, it's unethical, because evolution doesn't care about happiness or peace. It only demands survival, no matter the cost. And that cost is everything. Pain, fear, hunger, loss, on a cosmic scale. So, the Efilist asks, if you could stop it, would you? If you held a switch that with one gentle motion would end all life, painlessly, without suffering, would you flip it? No more predators, no more prey, no more screams in the dark, just silence. This is not a call for destruction but a plea for release, to end the cycle, to free all creatures from the factory they never asked to enter. Critics say Efilism is extreme, even nihilistic, but its defenders reply with calm clarity. They ask, if you would not force someone into endless agony, why allow a system that guarantees it again and again? Efilism offers no comfort, no illusions. Just one brutal, elegant question. If existence means suffering, should we keep it going, or let it fade into stillness and finally into peace? Imagine a world where the highest moral good isn't to increase joy, but to reduce pain. This is the foundation of a rare ethical path called negative utilitarianism, where traditional utilitarianism asks, how can we create more happiness? Negative utilitarianism asks, how can we remove suffering? And which is more urgent? Happiness is beautiful, but suffering is brutal. It consumes, it lingers, it changes everything. Pleasure may pass, but pain has a way of staying and speaking louder. One of the first to express this was philosopher Karl Popper. He believed that the goal of ethics should not be to build paradise, but to avoid hell, not to make life perfect, but to make it less unbearable. Because when someone is suffering, joy is irrelevant. Food, shelter, medicine, safety, those are what matter. Negative utilitarianism places these needs above all else, and in many cases, that feels intuitive. A sick child needs care before a happy one needs a toy. A person in crisis needs calm before another seeks delight. But this philosophy doesn't stop with simple acts of kindness. It dares to look deeper and farther. It asks unsettling questions about life itself. If suffering outweighs joy, if pain is inevitable and persistent, then would preventing new lives be a moral choice? Here, negative utilitarianism overlaps with antinatalism. Both suggest that non-existence might be more ethical than exposing someone to the certainty of pain. It's a conclusion many find troubling. Critics say this view is dangerous, that it risks ignoring the richness of love, laughter, fulfillment. They warn that taken to extremes, it could justify horrifying actions. If the goal is simply to eliminate suffering, then would it also mean eliminating the ones who suffer? A question that walks the edge of ethics. But most negative utilitarians do not advocate such extremes. Instead, they offer a lens to see suffering more clearly, to take it seriously as a moral weight, not to be minimized or brushed aside. Yet even here, there are challenges. How do we measure pain? What's unbearable for one might be tolerable for another. Can we compare a child's hunger to an elder's loneliness? A burn to a heartbreak? Pain is not simple nor universal, and this makes moral choices difficult, especially at the scale of governments and policy. But in places like global health, this framework has practical power. If resources are limited, shouldn't we begin with those in the greatest pain? Shouldn't we treat the dying before the mildly unwell? Negative utilitarianism pushes us toward this prioritization, toward clarity and compassion. And it also asks us to examine our own beliefs. Our cultures often celebrate suffering as noble, a sign of strength, a gateway to wisdom. But what if it isn't? What if suffering is not a test, but a call to kindness? Not a burden to glorify, but a signal to help. This view doesn't deny joy, but it demands we do not ignore suffering in its name. Because even small moments of care, a hand held, a wound dressed, a word offered in silence, can shift the world for someone in pain. Negative utilitarianism asks us to build that world step by step, not through grand illusions, but by noticing who suffers and doing something about it. Imagine a world without us. No cities, no highways, no smoke rising into the sky. Just forests returning, oceans healing, and the quiet song of nature uninterrupted. This is the vision behind the voluntary human extinction movement. A philosophy that sounds extreme, but is rooted in compassion, not for humans, but for the earth itself. The idea is simple, yet radical. Humans should stop reproducing, not by force, but by choice, to allow our species to slowly and peacefully fade away. To give the planet a chance to breathe again. Founded by Les Knight, the movement isn't driven by hatred or despair. It's not about punishing humanity, but about stepping aside so the natural world can recover from our presence. Knight speaks of voluntary extinction as an act of love, a selfless gesture for the benefit of life beyond our own, because our impact runs deep. We've altered ecosystems, dammed rivers, cut down rainforests, and filled the skies with heat-trapping gases. Species vanish daily, not because of natural selection but because of human expansion. Supporters of the movement believe that even the greenest solutions come at a cost. Renewable energy, recycling, sustainable farming, they all still require resources, land, labor. And behind every sustainable policy lies the weight of nearly 8 billion mouths to feed. The core problem, they say, is not how we live, but how many of us live. And so they propose something rarely considered in modern discussions of progress: restraint. The willingness to let go for the sake of everything else. For them, voluntary extinction is not despair, but mercy. A way of choosing not to dominate, not to consume, not to control, but to vanish gently. Still, the philosophy invites fierce resistance. Critics argue that humanity is not just destructive, but also creative and caring. We build, we protect, we love. We've cured diseases, defended endangered species, and even begun repairing the harm we've caused. Why give up when we're learning to do better? They'll also question whether removing humans would truly end suffering. Nature itself is not peaceful. Even without us there would be pain, predators, parasites, starvation, death. So, is a humanless world actually a kinder one? And what of our worth? To speak of extinction feels like a denial of our value, of our art, our stories, our potential. But the movement insists that worth and harm are not the same, and that even beings capable of beauty can do great damage. They do not argue for hatred of our kind, but for responsibility, for recognition that we are the single most powerful bases to ever walk the earth. And with that power then comes a choice. Not all supporters expect the movement's vision to come true, but they believe its questions are essential. What does it mean to progress? Is growth always good? Is more always better? Or is there wisdom in stepping back, in shrinking our shadow instead of stretching it? The voluntary human extinction movement asks us to reimagine legacy, not as conquest, but as care, not in monuments, but in meadows, not in permanence, but in permission for the world to go on without us. You don't have to agree to be moved, because its message touches something deep. The hope that we might be remembered not as destroyers, but as those who once chose to leave quietly, so that others might live fully. Imagine a world where billions of people live lives barely worth living, not in agony, but not in joy either, just drifting at the edge of satisfaction. And now imagine this world is called better than a smaller one where everyone thrives in deep happiness. This is the unsettling idea behind a paradox known as the Repugnant Conclusion, introduced by philosopher Derek Parfit in his book Reasons and Reasons, a quiet riddle that unravels our understanding of population, morality, and meaning. The logic is simple but disturbing. Start with a small group living lives of extraordinary depth and joy. Then add more people, each living lives less satisfying, but still above the threshold of worth living. The average life quality goes down, but the total happiness goes up. And if we follow that logic to its end, we arrive at a planet teeming with billions, each living on the edge of contentment, but none truly flourishing. And somehow this world is labeled morally superior because it has more happiness overall. Many recoil at this idea. How could a world of shallow experience be better than one of richness and meaning? Yet, under a strict utilitarian lens that prioritizes the sum of happiness, this is the conclusion. And it's called repugnant because it clashes so violently with our intuition. We begin to question whether happiness can be measured like water in a jet, whether people can be reduced to points on a moral scoreboard, and whether the quality of a life should be sacrificed for quantity. Critics argue that this is where utilitarianism breaks, that by chasing total happiness, we lose sight of other values like dignity, justice, and the richness of individual experience. They say we need an ethical view that respects not just how many are happy, but how deeply they are. Some suggest the idea of average utility instead, where we aim not for the most happiness total, but for the highest average per person. Under this idea, a smaller, flourishing world could be morally better than a vast, shallow one. But this too brings complications. What if lowering the average meant removing people? What if raising happiness meant shrinking society? The answers get murky. Others propose that morality should only apply to those who already exist, that we are not morally obligated to bring new people into being, only to care for those already here. This flips the equation. No longer is more better, but better becomes better. This debate isn't abstract. It has real-world weight. Governments face choices every day between lifting a few to great heights or helping many just survive. Is it better to fund 10 lives deeply or to ease the pain of 10,000 just a little? The repugnant conclusion forces us to wrestle with that dilemma, and its influence reaches far. From debates about birth rates and climate, to ethics in technology, medicine, and the future of civilization, and it touches the very question, what kind of world should we be building? Is happiness an objective metric, or too fragile to quantify? Should we care more for those alive or those not yet born? And when do numbers stop being ethical and start becoming inhuman? In the end, the repugnant conclusion is not an answer, but a mirror. It shows us the strange shape of our moral thinking, and reminds us that the pursuit of a better world often leads us to darker questions, where truth is not simple and goodness demands uncomfortable thought. Suffering. Why does it exist? In a universe capable of love, beauty, and joy, why is it also flooded with pain, grief, and cruelty? This haunting question, known as the problem of suffering, has echoed through human thought for centuries. At its core, this is not just a question of cause, but of meaning. What does suffering tell us? What are we meant to learn from it, or endure through it? Suffering wears many faces: the sharp ache of a broken bone, the silent grief of a lost loved one, the invisible weight of anxiety, the deep wound of betrayal. It touches every life. From the powerful to the powerless, no one escapes it. This universal thread binds us all. But why? Is suffering simply a cruel accident, a random flaw in nature, or does it hide a deeper purpose? Those who believe in a divine power face one of the most ancient dilemmas. If there is a God, all-knowing and all-loving, why allow such suffering to exist? This question, the problem of evil, has stirred endless theological debate. Some say suffering is a test, a way to strengthen faith. Others see it as the price of free will. If we are to choose love, we must also be free to choose harm. And yet these answers often feel too small in the face of earthquakes, pandemics, and the quiet cries of innocent children. Secular perspectives offer a different view. They trace suffering to biology and evolution. Pain keeps us alive, a warning, a signal to pull back from fire, poison, danger. Fear helps us run. Grief helps us adapt. These are survival tools, not cosmic punishments. But even when we understand the purpose, the experience still burns. Knowing the mechanics of suffering does not ease its sting. Existentialists like Nietzsche and Sartre saw suffering as inseparable from the human condition. Nietzsche wrote, "To live is to suffer. To survive is to find meaning in the suffering." He saw pain as the crucible through which we grow as individuals, not something to escape, but to embrace, transform. Sartre believed suffering was the cost of freedom. Because we can dream, we can be disappointed. Because we can choose, we can regret. This, too, is the price of being fully human. But in the East, another voice speaks. Buddhism begins with suffering, dukkha, the first of the Four Noble Truths. It teaches that pain arises from our attachments, from our clinging to permanence, pleasure, and control. And because the world is always changing, we suffer when we try to hold on. The path forward, according to the Buddha, is not resistance, but acceptance. Through mindfulness, ethics, and understanding, we loosen our grip and soften our suffering. Modern psychology adds yet another layer. Research shows that pain itself is not the only source of our suffering. It is also the story we build around it, the meanings we assign, the judgments we carry. I'm a failure. I'll never heal. I'm not enough. These thoughts amplify the wound. Therapies like CBT and practices like meditation help interrupt these patterns. They teach us to see pain as it is, not as we fear it will always be. And as today, with the rise of artificial intelligence and biotechnology, some dream of a future without suffering at all. What if we could rewire the brain? What if pain became optional? But even that vision raises questions. If we could erase suffering, should we? Or is there a wisdom in pain, a depth we would lose by numbing ourselves completely? Because for all its cruelty, suffering also connects us. We reach out when we see it. We grow when we survive it. It humbles us, awakens compassion, and brings clarity to what truly matters. Some find meaning in faith, others in philosophy, some in the quiet support of love. But all of us are united by this common wound. We may not solve suffering, but we can respond to it with care, with courage, with reflection. Because suffering is not just pain, it is also presence. A reminder that we are alive, that we feel, that we need one another. And perhaps its deepest lesson is that even in the darkest places, there can still be light. What if the answer to life's deepest struggles was to stop struggling? What if the path to peace was not to conquer your challenges, but to surrender to them? This is the gentle, radical heart of Quietism, a philosophy that invites us to let go, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. Quietism doesn't mean giving up. It means stepping out of the noise, the endless striving for progress, certainty, and control. To understand it, picture someone standing in a river, fighting the current, desperate to move forward, but slipping back. Quietism suggests a different approach. Stop fighting. Let the water carry you. This is not passivity, but a form of clarity. Knowing when effort becomes resistance, and when surrender leads to peace. Quietism has deep roots across many traditions. In ancient Greece, Pyrrho, the founder of skepticism, believed that we cannot truly know the great truths of life. So, instead of clinging to conclusions, he chose stillness of mind, letting go of judgment, and finding calm in uncertainty. This state of suspension, he believed, was the key to inner tranquility. In 17th century Spain, Miguel de Molinos brought Quietism into the spiritual realm. He taught that peace of soul comes not from effort, but from stillness, not from doing, but from trusting. By letting go of desire and striving, one could draw closer to the divine through silence and surrender. Eastern wisdom echoes this. Taoist teachings speak of Wu Wei, effortless action, the art of flowing instead of forcing. In Zen Buddhism, too, there is deep reverence for the present moment, for letting go of control and simply being. Different paths, but one thread. True peace doesn't come from dominating life, but from dissolving into it. But Quietism is not without its critics. Some say it's too passive, that it risks ignoring injustice or sidestepping responsibility. But Quietists would say that they do not ignore the world. They simply stop clinging to it. They believe that much suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our attempt to shape reality to match our desires. When we stop grasping, we begin to see clearly. This doesn't mean inaction, but acting without desperation, without ego, without illusion. In modern philosophy, Ludwig Wittgenstein reflected this Quietist spirit. He believed that many philosophical problems are not solved, but dissolved. They disappear once we see that our language was leading us astray. He wrote, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent." Silence as understanding. Quietism also offers a challenge to the world we live in, a world obsessed with productivity, success, self-improvement. We chase more, believing it will make us whole. But does it? Or does it leave us more anxious, more disconnected, more lost? Quietism suggests we step back, not forever, not from all things, but enough to remember who we are without all the noise. It's not a formula or a fix, but a shift in vision, a quiet turning inward, where contentment is not found in achievement, but in acceptance. Not in more, but in enough. In a world that tells us to speak louder, Quietism tells us to listen deeper, to slow down, to soften, to surrender. Because sometimes the most powerful truths come not when we strive for them, but when we finally let them come to us. A whisper from the void telling us that life has no inherent meaning. The universe doesn't care. It doesn't watch, or weep, or plan. It simply is. And everything we build, every love we cherish, every goal we chase, will one day vanish. This is the essence of existential nihilism, a philosophy that strips away illusions and asks us to face the raw silence beneath existence. For many, this realization feels like a descent into the abyss, a space where purpose dissolves and value becomes vapor. This philosophy rose in the ashes of faith and tradition. Thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche, Soren Kierkegaard, and Fyodor Dostoevsky watched the collapse of divine authority. Nietzsche declared God is dead, not in triumph, but in mourning. Without God, the scaffolding of meaning fell, and humanity was left exposed into a universe that offers no answers. This emptiness isn't just cosmic. It creeps into the details of daily life, the work we do, the relationships we hold, the beliefs we shape. None of it, nihilism says, has value unless we give it value. To the existential nihilist, this is not despair, it is simply truth. The universe follows no story, has no agenda. and any meaning we find is meaning we create. Jean-Paul Sartre offered a unique view. He didn't see the void as a problem to fix. He called it freedom. We are condemned to be free, he wrote. Without a divine script, we must become our own authors. A terrifying freedom where every choice is entirely our own. For some, this freedom feels like drowning. If life has no objective purpose, why act? Why care? This is the heart of the existential crisis. That quiet moment when everything seems both infinite and pointless. But not all who look into the void are lost to it. Some find a strange liberation in the absence of meaning. Without imposed beliefs, they feel free to live authentically, to break from society's stories and write their own. But the path is difficult. Without a universal guide, how do we decide what matters? Nihilism doesn't provide rules or instructions, only a mirror. And in that mirror, we must see ourselves. Some find hope not in cosmic design, but in fleeting moments, a sunset, a quiet walk, a laugh in the dark. Moments made precious by their impermanence. Critics call nihilism too dark, too empty. They fear it leads to apathy or moral collapse. And yet, many artists, writers, and thinkers have used nihilism not as an end, but a beginning. Dostoevsky asked if we can be moral without God. Albert Camus explored the absurd, the tension between our hunger for meaning and a universe that offers none. In the myth of Sisyphus, Camus tells us we must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because his task makes sense, but because he chooses to keep going, to push the stone again and again. That, Camus says, is rebellion. Existential nihilism doesn't offer comfort. It doesn't promise peace. But it offers a challenge. What will you do when the map disappears? For some, this question is paralyzing. For others, it's the start of true freedom. Because if life has no script, you are free to write your own. No meaning means no limits. No design means no boundaries. In the end, nihilism doesn't erase life's value. It shifts it. From the stars to the self. From eternity to now. From the divine into the deeply human. Your life is yours to define. Suffering. It finds everyone quietly or violently, softly or without mercy. It visits the young, the old, the lost, and the loved. But why? Why must life be shaped by pain? Why must beauty be shadowed by sorrow? Is it simply a cruel defect of living? Or does suffering hold a deeper meaning? For thousands of years, humans have asked this question. And in the asking, we've built philosophies, religions, and stories, all in search of an answer. Because suffering is not just an experience, it is a mystery, woven into the fabric of life itself. The ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus believed suffering was often born from fear. Fear of pain, fear of death, fear of the unknown. And by facing those fears directly, we could loosen suffering's grip. Not erase it, but understand it, enough to endure. Religions, too, offer their visions. In Christianity, suffering is sometimes a trial, a path to redemption, a dark road that can deepen faith. The story of Job tells of a man stripped of everything, yet still clinging to belief. His pain, never fully explained, becomes a means of spiritual transformation. Buddhism places suffering at the very center of its teachings. It names suffering, dukkha, as the first noble truth, not as punishment, but as the result of craving permanence in a world that constantly changes. To suffer, the Buddha taught, is to cling, and to be free is to let go. Through mindfulness and wisdom, one walks the path, not away from pain, but through it. Existentialists like Nietzsche saw the suffering not as a curse, but as a forge. He believed pain could be a source of strength, of art, of growth. That which does not kill us, he wrote, makes us stronger. To suffer was to confront life and emerge changed. But not all thinkers saw meaning in suffering. For nihilists, pain is just a side effect of existence, random, cold, meaningless. And though this view offers no comfort, it also removes the pressure to explain or justify our suffering. In that void, some find freedom, a chance to create meaning on their own terms. Modern psychology takes yet another approach. It asks not why we suffer, but how we respond. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote that our power lies in choosing how we meet our pain. Even in darkness, he believed we could still find purpose, not because suffering is good, but because response is power. Science, too, offers a lens. Pain protects, alerts, warns. It helps us survive. And emotional pain, grief, guilt, loneliness, can bind us, can build empathy, can push us toward connection. From an evolutionary view, suffering shapes society. It sharpens our instincts and softens our hearts. And yet, none of these explanations make the experience easier. In a world filled with war, illness, and loss, pain can feel like a weight without meaning, but sometimes in that weight, we discover something else. When the world breaks, people often come together to help, to hold, to heal. Shared suffering becomes shared humanity. It teaches us that we are not alone. Suffering asks hard questions and offers few answers. It tests our limits, breaks our illusions, and reminds us how fragile life truly is. But it also reveals how deeply we can endure and how far we can stretch in the name of love, compassion, and meaning. In the end, the meaning of suffering may never be universal. For some, it is spiritual growth. For others, it is a cruel reminder of life's indifference. And for many, it is simply a fact to be faced, not explained. But in facing it, we often uncover truths we never would have found in comfort. And in that, there may be a kind of meaning after all. Sometimes we ask the universe for meaning, and it answers with silence. This is the heart of the absurd, a tension between our deep hunger for purpose and the quiet indifference of everything around us. Albert Camus, the French philosopher, didn't see the absurd as a problem, but as a truth, a condition of life to be faced directly. The absurd isn't a riddle with a clever solution. It is the experience of searching for answers in a world that offers none. As humans, we want to know why we exist, why we suffer, what all of this is meant to mean. We build religions, create philosophies, explore the stars, write poetry, paint the void. But no matter how deeply we dig, the universe does not respond. It does not comfort or explain. It simply watches in silence. This silence can feel cruel, as if something essential is being kept from us. But Camus argued that this is not a betrayal and not a mistake. It is the truth of being alive, and once we accept it, something powerful happens. The absurd reveals itself not just in philosophy, but in our everyday lives. The repetition of routine, the climb toward success that feels hollow when reached, the pursuit of happiness that always seems just out of reach. These moments expose the gap between what we expect and what the world delivers. The absurd lives in that space between. But Camus warned against running from this truth. Many people, when faced with the absurd, seek to escape it. They cling to systems that promise meaning, religions, ideologies, beliefs that provide comfort but avoid the confrontation. Camus called this philosophical suicide. To deny the absurd is to surrender your freedom. He believed we must do the opposite. We must face it fully and without flinching. If life has no grand purpose, then it becomes our responsibility to create our own. Camus offered a symbol for this rebellion. Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to push a boulder up a hill forever, only to watch it fall, an endless, pointless struggle. And yet, Camus tells us, we must imagine Sisyphus happy, because in choosing to continue, to push, to live, despite the absurdity, Sisyphus becomes free. This is not false hope or blind optimism. It is defiance. It is joy in the act of living, even when the universe offers no reward. In this vision, the absurd becomes a gift, because without a cosmic plan, we are free to love, to create, to become whatever we choose. Success, in this light, is not measured by legacy or praise, but by authenticity, by courage, the courage to live fully, without pretending that meaning was waiting to be discovered. The absurd doesn't promise peace, it doesn't offer clarity, but it invites us to stop searching for a map and start walking, to embrace the tension and dance within it. In the end, life may be a cosmic accident, but it's ours, and in that, Camus saw not despair but possibility. Life wasn't planned. It wasn't designed. It wasn't inevitable. It is the result of a cosmic accident, an improbable unfolding in an indifferent universe. From the birth of the first atoms to the emergence of thought, every moment in the story of life has been shaped by randomness, and that changes everything. What does it mean to exist in a world with no script? To be alive, not because we were meant to be, but because somehow against all odds we are. To understand life as a cosmic accident, we must go back to the beginning. 13.8 billion years ago the universe began, a silent eruption from a single unimaginable point. Space, time, matter, energy, all born in an instant. At first chaos, particles colliding, energy spiraling. From this came atoms. Then gravity took its hold, gathering matter, sculpting stars and galaxies from scattered dust. There was no purpose, only physics, blind and persistent. Amid that swirling vastness, a star emerged. Nothing special, nothing grand, just one among billions. Around it the debris of creation formed planets, and on one, Earth, conditions aligned. A stable orbit, a protective atmosphere, the presence of liquid water, a cosmic lottery. Earth happened to win. Life began in the oceans, not with design, but with chemistry. Organic molecules drifting, colliding, reacting. Then, a spark. Self-replicating structures, the earliest forms of life. Evolution took over, a slow, unfeeling process driven by mutation and chance. Those who survived passed on their traits, most did not. But some did. And from that came everything, trees, insects, whales, us. But here's the catch. None of this had to happen. If the Big Bang had been a fraction different, if the Earth's orbit were slightly shifted, if one mutation in our lineage had failed, we wouldn't be here. The odds are almost unbearable. Yet here we are, not because we were chosen, but because we emerged, by chance. This realization can shake you. It humbles, it unnerves. We are not central to the universe's story. We are not its purpose. The cosmos existed for billions of years before us. It will continue long after. Our empires, our wars, our art, our names, all temporary. And yet, this does not mean we are meaningless. Existentialist philosophers saw in this absence of design a kind of freedom. If meaning is not given, we are free to create it. Scientists, too, find wonder in this randomness. Carl Sagan once said, "We are star stuff, forged in the hearts of dying stars. Our atoms, our blood, our breath, born in explosions older than memory. We are not and apart from the universe. We are of it. And if our lives are an accident, so are the lives of whales, trees, clouds, children." This view does not diminish us, it connects us. It reminds us of our shared fragility and our shared miracle. It reminds us to protect this world, not because it was meant for us, but because it is all we have. Seeing life as a cosmic accident invites us to let go of certainty, to stop demanding that the universe provide answers, and instead, to marvel at the question, your life may not have been planned, but it is yours. And in a universe that does not notice, the act of noticing, of wondering, of caring, becomes something sacred. Happiness always just out of reach. We chase new goals, dream of bigger things, tell ourselves, if we just had more money, more success, more love, we'd finally feel complete. But when we get those things, the joy fades, the stillness never comes, and the cycle begins again. This is the hedonistic treadmill, a quiet loop of longing, a pattern woven into the mind. Psychologists call it hedonic adaptation, our tendency to return to a baseline level of happiness no matter what happens in our lives. Win the lottery, land the dream job, fall in love, you feel a high. But it doesn't last. Lose your job, go through heartbreak, you fall. But you rise again. Not to the same, but to something familiar. This loop isn't anecdotal. It's been studied, measured, confirmed. Millions won, millions lost. And yet, within a year, most people feel almost exactly as they did before. That's the paradox. What we think will change everything often changes very little on the inside. So, we chase again. A better house, a bigger title, a newer body, a better version of ourselves, and still, the satisfaction slips through our fingers. Why? Because what once felt extraordinary soon becomes ordinary. We adapt. And the dream house becomes just a house. The dream job becomes just work. This treadmill is not a flaw. It's an ancient survival instinct. Our ancestors lived in a world where comfort was dangerous. To survive meant to keep moving, seeking, preparing for the next threat. That drive served us once, but in the modern world, it leaves us restless, unsatisfied, never quite whole. So how do we step off? One insight is to recognize that material things have diminishing returns. Money helps, up to a point. It provides safety, security, and freedom from stress. But beyond that, its impact fades. After our basic needs are met, more doesn't mean better. More just becomes more. So we turn to something else. Experience, connection, moments instead of things. Studies show traveling, sharing meals, laughing with loved ones brings longer-lasting happiness than possessions ever could. Why? Because experiences become memory. They become part of us. They deepen connection instead of collecting dust. Another key, gratitude. When we stop to truly notice what's already here, we interrupt the chase. We anchor ourselves in presence. And in that pause, contentment can grow. Practice gratitude, not as a habit, but as a way of seeing. Notice the softness of a morning light, the warmth of someone remembering your name, the breath you didn't have to earn, and then mindfulness. When we live in the moment, we stop living for the next one. Mindfulness is not stillness. It's noticing the motion without needing to outrun it. It reminds us happiness is not a destination. It's a state of being. The treadmill teaches us not just about happiness, but about our own resilience. Yes, we adapt to pain and to pleasure. And that adaptation means we can survive what once felt unbearable. But it also means we must stay conscious of what we chase. This doesn't mean we give up goals. Ambition is not the enemy. But it asks us to pause and ask, what are we really chasing? Are we moving toward meaning? Or are we just moving? The treadmill isn't about what's ahead of us. It's about how we walk. We can slow down. We can look around. We can choose. Instead of running in circles, we can move with purpose. We can savor. And in that shift, we step off the treadmill. We stop chasing and start living. A lens that does not distort, but strips away the illusions. A worldview not of despair, but of clear-eyed recognition. It begins with a truth. Life is steeped in struggle, laced with suffering, and defined by desires that rarely find lasting fulfillment. Where optimism insists on progress and purpose, pessimism pauses and asks at what cost. This isn't about gloom. It's not depression in disguise. Philosophical pessimism seeks something far braver: honesty. It dares to question the assumptions we cling to. About happiness, about human goodness, about the meaning we desperately want life to have. At the heart of this view stands Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher who saw suffering not as an occasional shadow, but as life's constant companion. To Schopenhauer, our torment springs from the will to live, a blind, ceaseless drive etched into every living creature. Desire, he said, is not a spark of hope, but a curse of restlessness. Fulfill one longing, and another arises. Satisfaction is brief, dissatisfaction unrelentless. He saw this will as the true tyrant of life, a force that binds all beings, predator and prey, healthy and sick, child and elder, into a shared fate of striving that ends inevitably in death. Even joy, in Schopenhauer's view, was only the momentary relief from pain, and that relief, fleeting. Friedrich Nietzsche, who followed him, did not reject pessimism. He wrestled with it. Nietzsche did not deny life's cruelty. He stared into it. But where Schopenhauer recoiled, Nietzsche embraced. He urged us not to flee from the chaos, but to dance in it. To affirm life not because it is kind, but because it is real. His yes to suffering was a call to rise above it, to create meaning in a universe that offers none. And then there was Emile Cioran, dark, biting, haunted by the absurd. Cioran wrote not to comfort, but to expose the unbearable contradictions of life. He described existence as a wound that thinks, a prolonged betrayal of our illusions. But even in his despair, he found poetry, a strange solace in admitting that all our pursuits, our goals, our stories, our triumphs, float over a void we cannot fill. Pessimism does not mock our efforts. It simply asks, do we see clearly? This philosophy also challenges our obsession with progress. Technological, personal, social. We're told we're moving forward. But are we? The pessimist replies, perhaps the scenery changes, but the suffering remains. New tools, new luxuries, new distractions. But the same gnawing hunger, the same fragile bodies, the same fear of death. Progress may ease pain, but it cannot eliminate the fundamental ache of being alive. And what about happiness? We treat it like a destination, a prize to be claimed. But to the pessimist, happiness is a mirage. It tempts, but it never stays. The more we chase it, the more we're disappointed. And so, instead of grasping for perfection, pessimists suggest we learn to live with the cracks, to see beauty not in illusion but in imperfection. This isn't surrender, it's a redefinition. Philosophical pessimism finds its comfort in solidarity. If suffering is universal, then so is the chance for empathy. Pain connects us, not as victims, but as companions on the same winding road. We help not because life is glorious, but because life is hard. And kindness matters even more when things fall apart. In a world that glorifies positivity, pessimism offers balance. Not to deny joy, but to acknowledge the cost at which it comes. Critics call it defeatist, but that's a misunderstanding. Pessimists do not deny the existence of light. They simply refuse to ignore the dark. They tell us, don't build your hope on illusions. Build it on something sturdier, something honest. In this way, pessimism becomes a kind of liberation. When we stop expecting life to deliver constant happiness, we stop feeling betrayed when it doesn't. We meet reality as it is. And in doing so, we grow deeper, wiser, more human. This philosophy doesn't offer easy answers, but it offers something rare, clarity. It teaches us to find meaning not in promises, but in presence, not in chasing joy, but in sitting quietly with sorrow and learning its name. To be pessimistic is not to hate life. It is to look life in the eye and still say, I see you, and I'm still here. Eco-philosophy, a quiet yet urgent call to remember where we come from. Humanity has built towers that reach the clouds, yet forgotten the soil beneath our feet. We have extracted, reshaped, and consumed, not out of malice, but out of a belief that the world was ours to use. But now as forests vanish, oceans warm, and species vanish into silence, a question echoes louder than ever. What is our rightful place in the web of life? Eco-philosophy dares to ask this. It challenges the idea that humans are the pinnacle of evolution, the center of the universe's story. Instead, it whispers something far older and far truer. We are not above nature. We are of it. Eco-philosophy is not merely environmentalism. It is deeper, a philosophical reawakening. It urges us to look beyond carbon footprints and recycling bins, to question the very lens through which we view the natural world. At its heart, it is a confrontation with anthropocentrism, the belief that nature exists for human benefit. Eco-philosophy says, no, the tree matters, not because it gives us oxygen, but because it is. The wolf, the river, the mountain, they all hold value regardless of what they offer us. This is the soul of deep ecology, a movement shaped by Norwegian philosopher Arne Næss in the 1970s. He proposed that we shift from a shallow, instrumental view of nature to one that honors its intrinsic worth. Under deep ecology, we are not managers of nature. We are participants in a sacred web that stretches across all species, ecosystems, and time. Its core principle, biocentric equality, asks us to imagine a world where no life form is inherently more important than another, not to diminish human needs, but to elevate all life to a position of reverence. This is not about erasing humanity, it's about decentering it. Deep ecology holds a mirror to the economic systems we worship, systems that prize growth over balance, profit over preservation, speed over sustainability. It questions the myth of endless expansion on a planet with limits. It challenges us to rethink agriculture, energy, industry, not with fear, but with humility. Deep ecology also carries a profoundly spiritual undercurrent. Many indigenous traditions, long before Western science, understood this truth. The earth is alive, not metaphorically, truly alive. They taught that the rivers have memories, that the animals are our kin, and that we owe the land more than we could ever repay. Eco-philosophy draws from this wisdom and dares us to listen. Of course, not all are convinced. Critics say this view is naive, impractical in a world ruled by politics and markets. They ask, how can we protect all life when human survival often conflicts with it? What happens when the needs of a growing population collide with the rights of the land? These are not easy questions, but deep ecology doesn't pretend to have easy answers. Instead, it reframes the problem. What if the true crisis isn't one of technology, but of consciousness? What if the greatest challenge we face is not to save the planet, but to remember that we are part of it? This shift in consciousness is perhaps the most radical piece of eco-philosophy. It asks us not just to act differently, but to see differently, to see that the hummingbird and the coral reef, the wolf and the mushroom, are not background characters, but co-authors in the unfolding story of Earth. Eco-philosophy is not passive. It inspires action, from grassroots conservation to climate justice, to education that reconnects children with soil, sun, and sea. And yet it also invites stillness, to stand beneath ancient trees and remember what it means to belong, to grieve what we've lost, but also to imagine what could still be saved. In this way, eco-philosophy becomes not just a theory, but a way of being, a quiet rebellion against domination, against exploitation, against forgetting. It reminds us that the health of our planet is not as separate from our own, that saving a forest is saving a future, that harmony is not a utopia, it is a responsibility, and perhaps a return. Because in the end, eco-philosophy doesn't offer escape, it offers reconnection, a call to live within our limits with reverence, intention, and grace. To walk more slowly, to listen more deeply, to remember with humility that the earth was never ours to own, only to cherish. Loneliness, not the kind that comes from an empty room, a missed call, or a forgotten invitation, but a deeper solitude, a silence that echoes within even in the company of others. This is existential loneliness. A profound, inescapable truth of what it means to be human. No matter how connected we are, how deeply we love, or how closely we bond, there remains a part of us that is ultimately alone. It is not a flaw. It is a condition of consciousness. Existential loneliness is not the absence of others. It is the presence of self-awareness. It is the realization that no other being can fully inhabit our thoughts, feel our emotions as we feel them, or carry the private weight of our inner world, our joys, our fears, our regrets, all filtered through the veil of subjectivity. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard called this the individual's relationship with existence, a solitary journey. He believed that confronting this solitude was not an affliction, but a necessary passage toward living truthfully. We cannot live authentically until we first face the silent company of our own existence. Friedrich Nietzsche echoed this solitude in his vision of the Übermensch, a person who breaks free from herd morality to create meaning on their own terms. To Nietzsche, the road to self-realization was paved with loneliness, but it was also the path to personal freedom. To walk alone was not weakness, it was strength. Existential loneliness is also tethered to our awareness of mortality. We alone must face the reality of our death. No matter how many people stand beside us, no one can cross that threshold in our place. Martin Heidegger described this as being toward death, a defining feature of human existence. To live fully, he argued, we must live with the knowledge that we are dying. This knowledge isolates us, but it also awakens us, and in that awakening, existential loneliness takes root. But loneliness, for all its darkness, can also be generative. Writers, artists, thinkers, so many have drawn from the well of isolation to give the world beauty, insight, and truth. Franz Kafka's writings capture a deep sense of alienation and solitude. Yet they speak across generations to a universal ache. And perhaps this is the paradox. Our most private feelings can be the ones that connect us most deeply. In acknowledging that no one can truly know us, we recognize that others feel the same. In that shared solitude, we find solidarity. Existential loneliness also compels us to question the nature of love and connection. Can we ever truly know another person? Or are all relationships built on bridges that never fully reach the other side? Jean-Paul Sartre explored this in his play No Exit, where characters crave connection but distort one another in the process. For Sartre, our desire to be seen often clashes with the impossibility of being fully understood. And yet, the attempt matters. Even if we never reach total understanding, the reaching itself is an act of love. Many existentialists don't see loneliness as something to be solved. They see it as a mirror, a space where we meet ourselves without distraction. In this mirror, we confront mating identity and freedom. It can be frightening, but it can also be transformative. Modern psychology has begun to study the effects of existential loneliness on mental health. Some researchers suggest that naming this form of loneliness can help us live more courageously. By understanding that solitude is part of being human, we are freed from shame and inadequacy. We stop trying to cure what is natural and begin to integrate it into our sense of self. Existential loneliness does not disappear when we connect with others, but it becomes less overwhelming. When we listen deeply, hold space for another's truth, or share our own vulnerabilities, we create a bond that transcends explanation. We may still be alone in our thoughts, but we are no longer alone in our condition. This is the quiet gift of existential loneliness. It reminds us that while we cannot merge entirely with another's inner world, we can stand beside it in reverence. We can honor its mystery without needing to possess it. In the end, existential loneliness is not good or bad. It simply is a consequence of being alive and aware. It challenges us to look inward with courage and to look outward with compassion. And in doing so, we may discover that our most sacred task is not to escape our aloneness, but to live within it with grace. Philosophy has long been a mirror, sometimes revealing not our noblest dreams, but our darkest reflections. Misanthropy, the deep suspicion or critique of humanity, is one such reflection. It is not hatred of individuals, but a reckoning with the species as a whole, its patterns, its failures, its repeated violence against itself and the natural world. Misanthropy in philosophy does not arise from bitterness, but from clarity. It is a response to the persistent gulf between human potential and human behavior. At its most honest, misanthropy is not meant to tear humanity down but to awaken it. Arthur Schopenhauer offered one of the most profound early critiques. To him, the root of suffering was the blind, ceaseless will to live, a force that drives desire, competition, striving. and, inevitably, pain. No matter how much we achieve, satisfaction is fleeting. Every fulfilled desire becomes the seed of a new craving. And in this endless hunger, Schopenhauer saw not strength, but sickness. To him, humanity was not noble, but tragic, driven more by selfish impulses than rational thought or ethical conviction. Friedrich Nietzsche took a different stance. He, too, criticized humanity, especially its herd mentality, its clinging to comfort, its fear of growth. But Nietzsche's misanthropy was a fight, not a grave. He challenged us not to retreat from our flaws, but to overcome them. Where Schopenhauer saw resignation, Nietzsche demanded transformation. Become who you are, he urged, even if the path is solitary, difficult, and full of sorrow. The cynic philosopher Diogenes offered another voice. He wandered the streets of Athens with a lantern in broad daylight, looking, as the legend goes, for an honest man. He found only pretense. Diogenes mocked the conventions of his time, rejecting wealth, status, and social performance. His misanthropy was not driven by hate, but by frustration. Frustration that we as a species continue to choose illusion over truth. Jean-Jacques Rousseau added a softer note. Though not free of sorrow, he believed that humans were good in their natural state, but civilization itself had corrupted them. In seeking progress, he said, we lost our way. In building cities, we forgot our roots. Rousseau's critique of humanity was, at its heart, a plea, a hope that we might rediscover our connection to the earth and to each other. Modern misanthropy often turns its gaze toward the planet. Environmental philosophers like Arne Naess and proponents of deep ecology argue that humanity has become a destructive force, not simply by accident but by design. Our anthropocentrism, the belief that the world exists for us, has led to mass extinctions, ecological collapse, and a disconnection from the living systems that sustain us. This, too, is a kind of misanthropy, not blind contempt, but fierce accountability. Other philosophers, like Émile Cioran, took an even darker view. He described human life as absurd, futile, and unbearably aware of its own limitations. And yet, in Cioran's darkest moments, a strange light remains. His despair is laced with bitter humor and a haunting sensitivity to the human condition. Critics of philosophical misanthropy argue that it is too harsh, too quick to overlook human compassion, creativity, and the fragile beauty that occasionally emerges from our flawed condition. They point to music, acts of kindness, the search for justice, as evidence that we are more than a litany of mistakes. And many misanthropic thinkers would not disagree. They do not deny that we are capable of goodness. They simply insist we acknowledge the full spectrum, including the ugliness we too often ignore. Philosophical misanthropy forces us to ask, if humanity is fundamentally flawed, what then? Do we give up, or do we confront the flaws with open eyes and still choose to act with integrity? Nietzsche believed we could rise, but only if we stopped lying to ourselves. Schopenhauer believed we must see clearly, even if it meant suffering. Diogenes believed we must simplify. Rousseau believed we must return. Perhaps misanthropy, in its deepest form, is a kind of love, a painful love for what humanity could be, if only it stopped running from itself. It does not seek to condemn humanity, but to challenge it. To ask again and again, what does it mean to be human? And are we living up to it? Misanthropy is not a final judgment. It is a mirror. And sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to look into that mirror and not turn away. What if humanity could take control of its own evolution, not just adapting to our world, but redesigning ourselves from the inside out. This is the vision of transhumanism, a bold and controversial movement that seeks to overcome the biological limits of the human conditions using science, technology, and reason. Transhumanists believe that aging, disease, and even death are not unchangeable facts, but technical challenges waiting to be solved. And today, for the first time in history, that belief is edging closer to reality. Transhumanism starts with a provocative idea. Human beings are not the final form of intelligent life. For centuries, we've evolved slowly through natural selection, our genes shaped by chance and our environments. But now, we may be able to take evolution into our own hands. Advances in artificial intelligence, biotechnology, neuroscience, and nanotechnology are opening doors once thought firmly shut. Doors into a future where our minds and bodies are not just healed, but enhanced. One major goal of transhumanism is to eliminate physical vulnerabilities. Aging, for instance, is no longer seen as inevitable, but as a disease to be treated. Scientists are exploring therapies to reverse cellular damage, edit genes, and regenerate tissues. Tools like CRISPR are being used to correct inherited conditions and strengthen immune responses. Bioengineered organs, smart prosthetics, and neural implants are already reshaping what it means to live with a disability, or even what it means to be normal. But transhumanism doesn't stop at the body. It extends to the mind. Brain-computer interfaces are being developed to bridge the gap between thought and machine. The goal? To enhance memory, expand creativity, solve complex problems instantly, and eventually blur the boundary between human cognition and artificial intelligence. In this future, learning might no longer require reading or study, but direct mental downloads. But such potential comes with questions. Who gets access? Will enhanced humans create a new elite class, leaving the unenhanced behind? Will technology deepen existing inequality, giving biological advantage only to the wealthy and powerful? And what happens to identity when our bodies and brains are no longer fully organic? If you replace half your body, are you still you? If your consciousness is uploaded into a machine, is that new being still you, or merely a replica with the illusion of continuity? Transhumanists argue that identity is rooted not in flesh, but in consciousness and experience. But critics question whether we can fully separate mind from matter, or preserve selfhood in a digital shell. The ethical dilemmas only grow deeper. If we eliminate suffering, extend life indefinitely, and boost every cognitive ability, what will become of struggle, growth, and the very essence of what it meant to be human? Will life lose its texture, its urgency, its soul? Some worry that without limitation life could become sterile, a perpetual comfort zone lacking meaning. Transhumanism also raises practical questions. Do these technologies distract us from more urgent problems? Climate change, poverty, political instability. Could our obsession with self-enhancement be a form of escapism? Transhumanists respond that better humans might be better equipped to solve those very crises. But there are no guarantees. Perhaps the most radical dream of transhumanism is to conquer death itself. The concept of mind uploading, transferring consciousness to a digital substrate, offers the promise of digital immortality. But this too leads us into philosophical fog. If your thoughts and memories can be copied, is the you that continues the same as the one who began? Or is it a ghost of identity, an echo in silicon rather than a soul? Transhumanism also touches on our relationship to nature and the planet. Enhanced humans may require less food, less energy, less space, potentially easing the burden on Earth's ecosystems. Yet unchecked development may also create new forms of pollution, new ethical quandaries, new imbalances in the web of life. Transhumanism doesn't provide easy answers. It does, however, force us to ask the most important questions. Are we content to remain as we are? Or will we embrace the tools that could redefine us completely? Can we become more than human, without losing what made us human in the first place? This is not merely a scientific debate. It is a spiritual, ethical, and existential one. Transhumanism is a mirror, showing us both our potential and our peril. Whether we use these powers to liberate or dominate, to heal or to exploit, to unite or divide, is a matter of collective choice. We stand now at the edge of a new chapter, not as passive observers, but as the authors of our evolution. And the future we create will reflect not just our capabilities, but our character. Freedom, the aspiration of humanity, the birthright we yearn for, the ideal nations who rise and fall to protect. Yet despite its glory, freedom carries a contradiction. The paradox of freedom lies in the tension between our desire for absolute autonomy and the undeniable truth that freedom, to be meaningful, must exist within limits. It is a concept that has perplexed philosophers, poets, and revolutionaries alike. Imagine a world where you could do absolutely anything. No rules, no responsibilities, no expectations. At first it sounds intoxicating, but soon it becomes overwhelming. Without boundaries, choices lose meaning. If everything is permitted, then nothing truly matters. Absolute freedom, ironically, can feel like no freedom at all. For freedom to matter, it must exist within a framework, one that gives context to our choices and consequences to our actions. This becomes even clearer when we examine the relationship between freedom and responsibility. To be free is to choose, but every choice carries weight. True freedom isn't license, it's ownership. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist, explored this burden in his philosophy. He wrote that man is condemned to be free, not because freedom is a curse, but because it demands that we make decisions without excuses or ready-made scripts. There is no divine map, no cosmic permission slip. Only the raw, unsettling task of creating our own values. And in that process, freedom becomes both empowering and terrifying. Another layer of this paradox reveals itself in our relationships with others. Humans are not isolated islands. We are social beings, woven into families, communities, and cultures. But to live among others means limiting some of our freedom for the sake of peace, cooperation, and shared dignity. Laws, social contracts, moral codes. These are not the enemies of freedom. They are what make collective freedom possible. Without them, we descend into chaos, where the strong silence the weak and liberty becomes a privilege of the few. Freedom is also entangled with desire, and here too lies a trap. We often mistake freedom for the ability to fulfill every urge, but desires can enslave us. Addiction, obsession, and the endless chase for approval or success. Stoic philosophy offered a powerful insight. True freedom is not freedom to act on impulse, but freedom from impulse. To the Stoics, real liberty came from mastering the inner world, from aligning actions with reason, not compulsion. Discipline, then, is not the opposite of freedom. It is the gateway to it. The paradox shows itself again in the modern age of abundance. We live with more choices than ever. Careers, partners, lifestyles, information. Yet this endless menu can exhaust us. Choice overload leads to indecision, and indecision leads to regret. We become prisoners of potential, haunted by the options we didn't choose. This modern paradox is a reminder that too much freedom, unchecked and undefined, can leave us more lost than liberated. History echoes with the same lesson. Many revolutions were sought in the name of freedom, only to replace old tyrannies with new ones. Freedom from oppression often gave way to freedom within new cages. Power tends to fill vacuums, and unchecked freedom often invites unchecked control. On a personal level, freedom reveals its paradox in the lives we try to build. We imagine freedom as the ability to do whatever we want. But sometimes what we want now conflicts with what we want most. A musician sacrifices leisure for mastery. An athlete follows a strict regimen to one day rise above the rest. These sacrifices, while limiting in the moment, enable a richer kind of freedom. The freedom to express, to create, to become. This is freedom through commitment, not freedom from it. Even our technologies, which promise to free us, can become chains. Social media gives us a voice, but often drowns us in noise. We gain access to infinite information and lose touch with wisdom. In seeking to control our world, we may instead be controlled by it. But here lies the truth. Freedom isn't about doing anything. It's about doing the right thing, freely. To live not in rebellion against limits, but in harmony with them. To choose meaning over impulse, connection over isolation, purpose over chaos. This is the paradox, that real freedom requires structure. That true autonomy requires surrender to something higher than impulse, be it reason, principle, or love. The paradox of freedom is not a flaw in the human story. It is the story. And in embracing it, we don't weaken our liberty. We deepen it. Imagine a small red button sitting quietly in front of you. If you press it, it will instantly and painlessly erase all of humanity. No suffering, no destruction, no aftershocks or consequences. Just silence, just absence. Now ask yourself, would you press it? This is the red button thought experiment, a deceptively simple scenario that forces us to confront some of the deepest questions we can ask. What is the value of human life? Does suffering outweigh beauty? And do we, any of us, have the right to decide? The thought experiment begins with a premise that humanity is deeply flawed. Wars, greed, environmental destruction, inequality. Our collective history is riddled with pain, much of it caused by us. So, the button poses the question, would ending it all be an act of mercy? Would removing humans eliminate the suffering we inflict on ourselves, on animals, on the earth? The red button is not about impulsive decision-making. It's an invitation to reflect seriously on the very nature of existence. It asks us to weigh suffering against meaning. Is life inherently valuable even when it's filled with agony? Some argue yes, that life, even in its darkest corners, holds potential. For love, for joy, for creation, for transcendence. Others argue no, that the beauty of life is eclipsed by its cruelty, and that choosing not to bring more suffering into existence is a form of compassion. This echoes the views of philosophers like Arthur Schopenhauer, who believed that life is a restless cycle of craving and dissatisfaction, where fleeting pleasures are but temporary distractions from inevitable pain. From his perspective, pressing the button might seem merciful, a clean end to endless striving. Yet others see suffering not as a flaw in the system, but as part of what gives life depth and dimension. Without sorrow, would we recognize joy? Without hardship, would there be anything to overcome, anything to learn from? Then comes the ethical dilemma. Even if you believe the button would end suffering, do you have the right to press it for everyone? Humanity is not a monolith. Some live in unbearable pain. Others wake each morning in quiet gratitude. Many suffer and flourish in equal measure. To press the button would be to erase the whole spectrum. The tragedies, yes, but also the music, the kindness, the discoveries, the love. What about hope? We have changed before. We've cured diseases, expanded rights, created art that stirs the soul. To press the button is to give up not only on who we are, but on who we might still become. And yet, there are those who still lean toward pressing it. Often they point to the environmental argument that humanity is the root of planetary destruction, that without us the earth would heal, forests would regrow, oceans would breathe, species would return. But this raises a deeper metaphysical question. Does the earth have value without us to witness it? If no one is left to marvel at beauty, does beauty remain? If no consciousness exists to suffer, does meaning disappear as well? And then there's the twist. What if the red button isn't real at all? What if it's just a thought experiment, a moral mirror, a test not of action but of awareness? Maybe the presence of the button isn't an invitation to press it, but a challenge to consider its existence at all. Perhaps, in choosing not to press it, we affirm something vital, that life, despite its chaos, is worth wrestling with. That imperfection doesn't nullify value. The red button becomes a symbol, not of destruction but of reflection. In this sense, it is not about the button or the act, but about the question. It reminds us of the weight of our species, of our capacity to destroy and to heal, of how far we have fallen and how far we could rise. It asks us to grapple with the raw paradox of being alive, how we carry both the capacity for violence and the longing for peace. And in that grappling, we find something that cannot be replicated in algorithms or machines: conscience. In the end, the red button remains unpressed, not because the answer is obvious, not because life is perfect, but because the very struggle to answer is what defines us. And perhaps that struggle is reason enough to continue. What if everything you know, every moment of joy, every hardship, every memory, and every thought exists within a simulation? Simulation theory proposes that our reality may not be the fundamental one, but rather the creation of advanced beings or artificial systems. It suggests that what we perceive as solid and tangible, the ground beneath our feet, the warmth of a sunrise, the pain of loss, might be no more real than the pixels of a video game. The implications are staggering, especially when we consider suffering. If our lives are simulated, does pain hold the same moral weight? What does it mean for how we understand ethics, freedom, and the very purpose of existence? Simulation theory gained prominence through thinkers like Nick Bostrom, who argued that if advanced civilizations ever gain the ability to simulate realities indistinguishable from their own, and if they choose to create many such simulations, then the statistical likelihood is that we are already living in one. Though it may sound like science fiction, the idea is built on logic. The exponential growth of computing power, the human drive to replicate consciousness, and the possibility that simulated beings might never realize they are simulated. But if our reality is, in fact, a simulation, what does that say about suffering? In a physical universe, suffering arises from biological processes. Injuries, diseases, heartbreaks, all experienced through neurons and flesh. Yet in a simulated world, pain might be nothing more than a line of code. So then why would it exist? One possibility is that suffering adds realism to the simulation. If the creators wanted to mimic life as they know it, then pain, just like joy, would be a necessary part of the design. Without suffering, there may be no contrast, no growth, no drama. A world without pain might feel hollow, devoid of meaning. Another possibility is that we are part of an experiment. Our suffering may be a variable the creators are observing. How do simulated beings respond to trauma? What kinds of societies do they build under pressure? How do they behave under the weight of mortality? Our pain, in that sense, might serve a purpose, but not one we are capable of understanding. This introduces unsettling ethical questions. If the creators have the power to eliminate suffering, are they morally obligated to do so? Would we hold them responsible the way we would judge human cruelty or negligence? Or is their perspective so far removed from ours that our very notions of morality don't apply to them at all? They might see the simulation not as a place to prevent pain, but as a kind of art, a self-contained story, or a living puzzle to be observed rather than intervened in. Then there's free will. If we are part of a program, are our actions truly our own? If pain is coded into our world, do we have any moral responsibility to reduce it for ourselves or others? These questions force us to reevaluate the foundations of choice, morality, and responsibility. And yet, pain still feels real, whether it comes from a ruptured nerve or from heartbreak, whether it's made of atoms or algorithms. Suffering is not diminished by its source. A simulated world may be fake, but the agony we feel, the joy we crave, the longing we endure, they are deeply real to us. That's the paradox. Even if this world is an illusion, our experiences remain meaningful because they are ours. Simulation theory also opens the door to a more hopeful question. What if we are not just passive programs, but active agents within this simulation? What if by understanding its nature, we can begin to shape it? Perhaps empathy, creativity, and cooperation are not just reactions to our code, but tools to transcend it. If we can recognize suffering as part of a system, perhaps we can learn to work around its patterns. Perhaps we can still choose compassion. Ultimately, simulation theory forces us to confront the biggest questions of all. What is the value of existence? What defines reality, its source, or the consciousness that perceives it? If we are simulated, does that make life less sacred or more miraculous? Because even in a fabricated world, we still love, we still dream, we still grieve. And that perhaps is what gives reality its meaning. Not its architecture, but its awareness. In the end, simulation theory may not answer anything definitively, but it does expand our view, challenging us to rethink reality, reframe suffering, and redefine what it means to be human. Whether we are made of atoms, code, or something in between, our choices remain real. Our empathy remains real. Our existence, however strange, still matters. And in the face of pain, uncertainty, and illusion, how we choose to live may be the most real thing of all. Meaning. It is the thread weaves through every story, every purpose, every belief we cling to. We chase it in careers, in relationships, in faith. But what if the universe never offered it to us? What if meaning was something we created, not something we discovered? This is the unsettling but profound premise behind the idea that meaning is a human invention. It does not exist out there, hidden in the stars or written into the fabric of the cosmos. Instead, it emerges from consciousness, from our need to make sense of what would otherwise be chaos. From the existentialist point of view, the world is fundamentally indifferent. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that existence precedes essence, that we are born without purpose, and it is we who assign value to our lives. This is not a curse, but a freedom with no divine script to follow. We become authors of our own meaning, but this freedom can feel like vertigo, because if meaning is made, not found, it can be lost. And if we stop creating it, the world threatens to collapse into absurdity. Albert Camus explored this confrontation. In his famous essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, he imagines a man condemned to push a boulder up a hill forever. To Camus, this is the human condition, repetitive, futile, and empty of external purpose. But in accepting the absurd, we are not defeated. We are liberated. Camus writes, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy." Meaning in this view is not what we wait for. It is what we create in our resistance to meaninglessness. Modern neuroscience adds another layer. Studies suggest that our brains are wired to impose narrative structure, to spot patterns, connect events, and build cause and effect relationships, even where none may objectively exist. This storytelling impulse helped us survive. It allowed early humans to assign reasons to thunderstorms and famine, to organize morality and myth, to give grief a frame and death a name. But these meanings were projections, not universal truths. We do not see the world as it is. We see it as we must in order to endure it. This is not to say that meaning is false. Rather, it is subjective. And that subjectivity is its power. A song can save one life and go unheard by another. A child's drawing can carry more meaning for a parent than any great work of art. A silent walk at sunset may heal in ways no doctrine ever could. These moments are not meaningless just because they are personal. They are meaningful precisely because they are ours. This understanding can be both disillusioning and beautiful. It strips away the need to search for some ultimate purpose, and instead invites us to build meaning where we stand, to live intentionally, to create art, to offer love, to stand for something even in a world that offers no reward for it. Meaning is a fire we tend, not a treasure we dig up. It flickers, fades, and must be rekindled, often in the quietest moments of doubt. And in this way, it is more sacred than anything given because it is earned. So, if you ever feel lost in the silence of the universe, remember this. It is not the universe's job to speak. It is yours to sing. Who are you? Not your name, not your job, not the story you tell others. Who are you when all the labels fade? This question has haunted philosophers, mystics, and scientists alike for thousands of years. At first glance it seems simple. We point to a body, a mind, a collection of memories, and say, "That's me." But dig deeper, and the self begins to unravel. It begins to dissolve. And what emerges is one of the most profound, unsettling, and liberating ideas in all of human thought, that the self, the I you think you are, is an illusion. Let us begin by exploring what we usually mean when we say self. Most people imagine the self as a fixed, continuous identity, a kind of inner witness that has remained unchanged since childhood. Even though your body changes, your beliefs evolve, and your memories shift, you still feel like the same person you were years ago. But this feeling of continuity is deceiving. Neuroscience tells us that our brains are in constant flux. Neurons fire, synapses rewire, hormones fluctuate, and memories are constantly being edited, often without our awareness. There is no single place in the brain where the self resides. No yours, no center. Instead, what we call self is more like a story, a narrative your brain constructs by stitching together sensory experiences, thoughts, emotions, and memories into a cohesive whole. It is a useful fiction, and like all fictions, it can be rewritten. The philosopher David Hume, in the 18th century, famously wrote that when he looked inward, he found no self, only a bundle of perceptions. Thoughts, feelings, and sensations come and go, but the self is nowhere to be found. And yet, we cling to it. We are addicted to the story of Fante. Why? Because the illusion of self gives us comfort. It gives us purpose. It gives us continuity in a world of constant change. But what if that continuity is nothing more than memory, selective, distorted, and fragile? The Buddhist tradition has long taught that the self is empty, a collection of ever-changing elements, like water in a river. There is no fixed I behind the eyes, only a stream of mental and physical phenomena, rising and falling with each passing moment. Meditation reveals this truth. Sit in stillness and observe your thoughts. Watch as they arise and pass. Like clouds drifting across the sky, you'll notice that no thought lasts, no emotion stays. Even the observer you believe is watching eventually vanishes. So what remains? Just awareness, just presence, just the experience of being. The spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle once described the self as the voice in the head, the one that comments, judges, compares, and remembers. But he also pointed out that if you can observe the voice, then you are not the voice. You are the awareness behind it. This distinction between thought and awareness is the key to unraveling the illusion, because if your thoughts can change, if your emotions can change, if your memories can be wrong, then what part of you is truly permanent? Some point to consciousness as the real self. But even consciousness as we experience it is dependent on the body and the brain. When we sleep without dreams, where is the self? When we undergo anesthesia, the self disappears. And when the brain is damaged by trauma, disease, or drugs, the self is altered. So, again, who are you? The illusion of self becomes even clearer when we examine the boundaries between me and not me. Take the body, for example. Every cell in your body is eventually replaced. The atoms that make up your skin, bones, and organs are borrowed from the food you eat and the air you breathe. So, is your body really you? Or is it something you temporarily inhabit, like a wave riding on the surface of an ocean? Even your thoughts are not as personal as you believe. Science shows that much of our thinking is shaped by language, culture, upbringing, and even genetic predispositions. Your beliefs, your preferences, your desires were all shaped by forces outside your control. You inherited a human mind. You inherited a human nervous system. You did not choose the core architecture of your identity. So, if the self is not the body, not the mind, not the memories, and not the voice in the head, what is it? Perhaps the better question is, why do we need it to be anything at all? Alan Watts once said, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. The moment you try to grasp the self, it slips through your fingers, because it was never there in the way you thought. And yet this realization is not meant to be nihilistic. In fact, it can be profoundly freeing. If the self is an illusion, then so is the weight you carry, the shame, the guilt, the fear, the constant striving to become someone better. All of these are built on the belief in a fixed self who must be protected, improved, or redeemed. But when you see through the illusion, you become lighter. You begin to live less from the story of who you are, and more from the flow of what is. You start to see that life is not happening to you. Life is happening through you. Every moment becomes an expression of the cosmos in motion, a dance of a form and emptiness, thought and silence, identity and release. And from this space, compassion can emerge. Because if the self is an illusion for you, it is an illusion for others as well. The person who hurt you was acting from their own illusion. The stranger you pass on the street is a bundle of patterns and memories, just like you. We are all trying to make sense of a world that is shifting, uncertain, and mysterious. We are all playing roles in a dream we forgot we were dreaming. And so, the illusion of self does not isolate us. It connects us. It reminds us that beneath the masks, beneath the names, beneath the opinions and the pain, there is only one awareness, one being, one unfolding dance. To live without a rigid self is not to lose meaning. It is to gain freedom. Freedom to be present. Freedom to change. Freedom to let go. The self may be an illusion, but love is not. Compassion is not. Beauty is not. These arise not from the story of who we are, but from the silence behind it. So, when you next ask, who am I? Try asking instead, who is asking? Then, wait. Listen. And let the question dissolve into the stillness from which you came. The self, the I we refer to in every thought, every sentence, every desire, feels like the most real thing we know. It seems constant, stable, and central. Yet when we look closely, through philosophy, neuroscience, or contemplative practice, that sense of a fixed, continuous self begins to unravel. The illusion of self is not simply a trick of the mind. It is one of the deepest and most enduring constructs we live by, shaping our fears, our ambitions, and even our suffering. To begin, let's examine the idea of the self as it appears in everyday life. Most of us feel as though there's an inner observer, an unchanging witness inside our heads, who makes decisions, remembers the past, and plans for the future. This sense of me feels unified and consistent. But from a scientific and philosophical standpoint, this entity is nowhere to be found. There's no central control room in the brain, no hidden homunculus watching a screen of sensory input and issuing commands. The brain is a dynamic network of processes, neurons firing, memories forming and dissolving. Consciousness is emergent, not centralized. The self, in this context, is not a thing but a process, a story the brain tells itself to create continuity. Philosophers have grappled with the problem of self for centuries. David Hume, the 18th century Scottish philosopher, famously wrote that when he looked inward, he could never find the self, only a bundle of perceptions, constantly changing. To him, the self was like a theater with no actor, a stage on which thoughts and feelings played out, but with no enduring substance behind them. This was not nihilism. It was a radical reorientation. Instead of a stable self, we have patterns of experience. This concept resonates with ancient Eastern traditions, particularly in Buddhism. The Buddha taught that what we call self is merely the temporary aggregation of 5 skandhas: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. None of these components, alone or together, constitute a permanent self. The belief in an enduring ego, Buddhism holds, is the root of suffering. Because we cling to a self, we feel fear, desire, pride, and anguish. Liberation, or nirvana, comes not from perfecting the self, but from seeing through it. Modern neuroscience supports these insights. Studies have shown that the brain regions associated with our sense of self, such as the default mode network, are active during mind-wandering, self-reflection, and autobiographical memory. Yet, these regions are not static. Damage to them, as seen in certain brain injuries or in cases of dissociative disorders, can disrupt the sense of self entirely. The self is fragile, not foundational. It can be altered, erased, or radically redefined. Meditative practices, especially those rooted in mindfulness and Dzogchen, provide another way of encountering the illusion of self directly. Long-time meditators often report a fading of the boundary between self and world. In deep stillness, the mind can begin to observe itself without grasping. Thoughts arise and dissolve. Sensations move through awareness, and what remains is not a self, but awareness itself, spacious, luminous, and free. This insight doesn't lead to apathy or moral collapse. In fact, it often has the opposite effect. By seeing through the illusion of self, people report increased compassion, less reactivity, and a profound sense of connection to others. If there is no hard boundary between me and you, then your joy is my joy, your pain is my pain. The illusion of self collapses into a deeper truth, interbeing. But if the self is an illusion, why does it feel so real? The answer lies in evolution. A strong sense of self helps an organism survive. It enables long-term planning, social cooperation, and the defense of territory. Our ancestors, who saw themselves as distinct entities, were more likely to live, reproduce, and protect their kin. The illusion of self, then, is a successful evolutionary strategy, but one that has outlived its usefulness in some respects. Today, the same mechanism that helped us survive also drives anxiety, consumerism, tribalism, and endless striving. The consequences of self-illusion ripple through our societies. We build identities out of nationality, religion, race, career, and belief, defending them as if they were our very essence. We suffer when our status is threatened or our image is criticized. We feel separate from nature, from each other, from life itself. And yet all of this rests on a concept that cannot withstand deep scrutiny. To live as though the self is real is not wrong, it is functional. But to see through it, even momentarily, is to open a door to freedom. We begin to act not from fear of losing the self, but from a place of clarity. We become less attached to ego, more open to change. We let go of the compulsion to solidify identity, and instead embrace the flow of experience. So, how do we live with the knowledge that the self is not what it seems? Perhaps not by rejecting the self outright, but by relating to it playfully, compassionately, and with awareness. We can hold our identity lightly, knowing it is a tool, not a truth. We can recognize our thoughts as events in consciousness, not declarations of who we are. We can engage the world from the mystery of a being, rather than the confines of identity. In this light, the illusion of self is not a mistake to be corrected, but a veil to be seen through. And behind that veil, we find not a void, but a vast interconnected awareness, free, open, and alive.